Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the lecture for week 2. Let me get everything squared away here. My name is Kim Grable, and I am your instructor for the class ART202. So we are starting this week with looking at formal elements, the elements that make up artwork. Um, just to go through chapters 4 through 6, you will basically be looking at um, several several activities this week, and one of the first things you're going to look at is texture and pattern. Texture and pattern is basically a way to describe something like this when you're looking at a painting. This texture is actually called impasto painting, and it's thick, sometimes added to a canvas or a masonite board with a knife, a paint knife, or fingers. You know, you can kind of see the shape of a finger here. You can also see that perhaps the artist used a brush with some of these shapes, but it is definitely specific to texture, visual, impasto, invented texture, trompe-l'oeil, and subversive and patterning texture. Um, and I probably just murdered that French word. The word texture describes the surface character of materials. There's a sense of touch that is being explored, even though in a situation or a setting of a museum uh, where they will not let you touch the paintings, the artists want you to see the layers of color through the paint being thick and having a specifically uh, maybe rough texture. Actual texture results from the surface variations in the materials that the artists use to create a work of art. Now, the painting technique that is literally allowing a painter to thick layers of applied paint, whether that application be with a paintbrush, a finger, a foot, a knife, uh, the other end of a brush, whatever it happens to be, the thickly applied paint is called impasto. And that's essentially what you're looking at and what you were looking at earlier. So that's called actual texture. Invented, let me get this where you can see all the notes. Invented texture is a version of visual texture. There's texture within the image, as you can see here. You can see textural, patterning and like a rough area here, but there's no reference to reality. So you've got something called subversive texture. It undermines the viewer's expectations for familiar surfaces. And this is by Max Ernst, and it's basically his uh, Eye of Silence. This is an important painting, not only because Gercolt painted it in the Romantic era, or the era of Romanticism in the early 1800s, but it's significant for all the composition settings here on this painting. It's a large painting. Let me click on the link.
We're in the Louvre looking at Géricault's Raft of the Medusa. This is a massive painting.
It's 16 by 23 feet. And it's important to remember that large paintings were reserved for important subjects that were generally ennobling or that showed a heroic deed of some sort. And this painting could not be further from that. It's not drawn from ancient Greek and Roman history. It's not a biblical subject.
The story behind this subject is one of the most gruesome in the history of the sea that had taken place just 3 years earlier.
The title of the painting, The Raft of the Medusa, is referring to a ship called the Medusa.
It was part of a small fleet of ships that were trying to reclaim Senegal from the British as a French colony. And it had about 400 people on board. Many of them were settlers. There were about 150 soldiers.
The man who was going to be the new governor of Senegal was also on board.
The problems began when the ship ran aground in the open ocean. There weren't enough lifeboats. And so the captain ordered the ship's carpenter to construct a raft from some of the lumber of the boat to hold everybody that couldn't fit into the lifeboats.
Well, naturally, those who went into the lifeboats were those of higher status, the captain, the officers, the politicians, and those that ended up on this makeshift raft were primarily the soldiers and the settlers. The idea was that the raft would be towed.
But within only a few minutes, when the captain realized that the lifeboat was being slowed by the raft, the line was severed and the raft was allowed to drift out to sea on its own.
So 150 people were abandoned at sea. What happened on the raft was horrific. There was starvation, murder, and of course the worst thing imaginable that happened was cannibalism. And there were even reports that some people were intentionally killed to provide food for the survivors.
And to preserve the small amounts of supplies that remained. And all of this is depicted in wrenching detail. The artist interviewed survivors. He made a full-scale model in his studio. He created small stages with clay figures in order to organize the figures, and he even retrieved body parts from the morgue, brought them back to his studio in order to be able to accurately depict putrefying remains.
You mentioned its naturalism, its realism, but in some ways it's not at all real. The bodies are clearly based on ancient Greek and Roman sculptures, on the studies of the nude figure that artists had to do at the academy. This crescendo of this pyramid of figures, clearly things were not organized in this way on the raft. This is a composition by an artist making a statement, saying something.
Creating a kind of anti-heroic painting that is still in the visual language of the Academy.
The captain had been appointed by the king. Now, the monarchy had been recently restored. You had this revolution that began in 1789 that established a republic in France that ended with the Napoleonic Empire and the restoration of a monarchy.
But the king's representative, the captain of the ship, failed. When Géricault is painting this canvas, he's making a political statement that is anti-monarchic, anti-king.
This was an incompetent captain who was appointed by the king and completely failed those he was entrusted to protect.
One of the most powerful aspects of this canvas is the composition. The corner of the raft is at the lower center point of the canvas, and it feels as if we can step onto it.
The raft is tipped into our space. That corner is foreshortened. This composition is designed to draw us in and up. The artist did many, many sketches. He did his research, but in the end made this decision specifically to draw us in.
To make this spectrum of emotion, from madness to despair at the bottom left, where we see a father mourning that beautiful body of his dead son, to the upper right, where we see an expression of hope.
The figure on the right pushes off with his right hand and lifts his left hand up in a last effort to be saved. All of the figures at this moment when they see the ship on the horizon, actually a moment that they will not be rescued. The rescue will take place a couple of hours later. So this is actually a moment of false hope. There's a sense of rotting bodies. The stench of death is present here to me. If we think about neoclassical paintings like David's Oath of the Horatii, we have figures from classical antiquity sacrificing their lives for a purpose. They are heroes. lives. Here, human life is taken for no reason at all. People are dying because of incompetence, because of abandonment.
And this is not neoclassicism. Jericho is helping to establish a style that we call romanticism. This is a style that is concerned with human emotion, that is characterized by fluid brushwork, energized composition with an emphasis on diagonals, on movement.
You could think back to artists like Rubens, the elevation of the cross, the way that the bodies are fused together in a single motion. Romantic artists are looking back to Rubens. They're not looking back as much to ancient Greek and Roman art, the way that the neoclassical artists had done.
But they're also concerned increasingly with human experience and with the power and majesty of nature, here expressed in the wave on the left that threatens to crash over the raft.
The Enlightenment had given people a sense that they could control their environment, that they could craft a better future for human beings, create a republic of laws, get rid of the corruption of the monarchy. And yet here, the corruption of a king has had terrifying ramifications. The revolution had undone, in many ways, the power of the church. There's no monarchy we can have faith in anymore. Romanticism is very much a style associated with this period after the failure of the revolution, the failure of the ideals of the Enlightenment.
And as if to underscore that idea, one contemporary critic, after seeing this painting, said, "We are all on the raft of the Medusa."
Okay, so I wanted to play that for you. Let me get back to the lecture. The reason I wanted to play that particular video, and I probably won't play any others, is because there are questions that are specific to Gerolds' Raft of the Medusa. So I'm hoping that will be helpful to you as you do your worksheet this week. There are also things called patterning or patterns, and those usually are repetitive or grouped elements, such as shapes, colors, lines, even textures can be added together to create a pattern. And patterning you'll see quite a lot, especially in modern painting as well as historic painting. This is specifically uh, a pattern that is very important, and it is on exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and it's held together by copper wire. One of the questions that you will probably need to know is, how does Gericault blur the lines of reality in his painting? And then what does a particular pattern say about a group or an individual, or a group, say, that possess various beliefs, like religious beliefs or customs? How does that patterning set that apart for people in just an overview of patterns? Now, moving forward into space and time, let me make this a little larger. We'll talk specifically about space, time, and motion. Even though you're looking at still images, there is a sense of motion. And a lot of the motion is accomplished by vertical positioning, atmospheric perspective, a lot of mathematical shapes, optical representations, conceptual representations, uh, perspective, 1 point, 2 point, vantage points, linear perspective, horizon lines, a lot to do with mathematics, frankly. Actual space refer to the dimensions in which we live and move. And freestanding sculpture occupies three-dimensional space, much like we occupy three-dimensional space. With freestanding sculpture like this piece from Alan Jones called Echo, you can walk around it. You can see it from a lot of different vantage points. Some freestanding sculpture is meant to be seen from only one vantage point, but this one is multiple. And you'll see other examples of sculpture as we go through the different chapters. Then there's the illusion of space. There's a suggestion, for instance, in this Rialto Bridge painting, uh, of distance, of a foreground and a background, or a distant sky, as you can see, and a bridge. You also see the shadow and how it's cast. So you kind of get an idea where the sun is. So you can see another shadow there. So there's the illusion of something called two-dimensional composition. And it's called implied or pictorial space. This may not be reality at all as far as what this scene is. This scene could be a two or even three dimensional perspective of the artist. He's creating this, which may not even exist in reality. Relative size, you know what relative size is. It's a way that artists suggest space by varying the size of objects. For instance, this woman is in the foreground, and you can see larger objects, including herself. And then in the background, you see probably a steamboat or something coming along this little river, or rivulet. It's really kind of a rivulet of water. So that's probably distant buildings and not a boat. And then there's this rather singular tree. Here are some people standing about. It's sort of a surreal, very odd feeling to this image. Uh, and this is partly because the artist took some silver dye bleach and made prints from a lot of old prints that she had cut up. So she essentially created a new reality with her painting. Overlapping, you can certainly see that here in this sketch of this is, let me make sure I tell you right. This is the church and council at Mount Saint Michel. And the painting, or rather the sketch, is in the National Museum of Women in the Arts in DC. So overlapping creates the illusion of space by imitating the real world effect of closer images obscuring the objects behind them or that are farther away. Here's a great example of overlapping and how it obscures what's going on in the building facade because we can't see through this tree. There's also some overlapping in here as well. So you can certainly see how easy overlapping can really disrupt natural space. Location is vertical positioning. It's a strategy in art to signify depth. The location suggests depth because of the viewer's tendency to read things at the top of the composition as further away or farther away than the things at the bottom. This looks very distant when you look at mountain ranges and cloud. You know, these sort of flat cloud banks that are in this background. And then the most probably, I guess you would say, the most noticeable aspect of this is actually leaded colored glass, is first of all the magnolia trees and then the surrounding flowers. Those seem much closer than they probably really are, as far as the artist is concerned. He wanted to give you that perspective. Atmospheric perspective is also known as aerial perspective. This is an image by Frederick Church that was painted in the mid 1800s. And it looks like we're above this scene, maybe in a helicopter or in an airplane. Of course, that wasn't possible then. So we're taking a bird's eye view of this image. Sorry about that. And a bird would be up high and could see different aspects of depth, of color, of the motion of the water, the spray of water from the waterfall. And you can see almost a downward spiral here. And then it goes into sort of a plain, the plains area. Then there's some trees. There looks to be like a big, perhaps a cliff here that goes down beyond what we can see. And then, of course, you've got the water and then what we would call the foreground right here. And that's all atmospheric, done with textures and gradients and colors and the interplay of warm and cool colors. This is called linear perspective. And this is when the formal systems developed by artists to portray three-dimensional objects in two-dimensional space come together. If you were to draw a line from, let's say, this railroad, what would you call that, a trestle or track? Let's say you start right here and you draw straight back to where you think the horizon might be, where you can see no further. Probably be right about here where this little white area is. You see how things kind of go and meet right there, the little gravel track, the land, and then you've got in the foreground this image of a man, and he is partially obscuring the vanishing point area. But there is no real vanishing point, meaning it doesn't exist necessarily in nature. It's implied because we want to give a linear perspective of depth to realistic subject matter. One point perspective looks like this. Let's say you've got a box, you hold it up, and if this is your vanishing point and this is your horizon line, where usually the sky meets the earth or the sky meets the ocean, okay? Then if I hold this box up, I'm going to see the underside in a one-point perspective situation. This box is further away from the vanishing point, and not only is it a little bit larger, but I can see the top and the side because of where it is. And then finally, you've got this smaller box, and it also has I would call it the parallel horizon lines or the transversals. Vertical central line of vision intersecting horizon line at the central vanishing point. Where's the central vanishing point? It's right here for all three of these boxes. Now, when you first, I teach a drawing class as well, and when you first start working in perspective by making freehand drawings, this gets a little skewed. You can kind of figure this out pretty well, but this doesn't look as natural as you would want it to look. You'd want it to kind of look like this flipped, and it does to some degree, but it is smaller and it's further away from us, the viewer, so it's got to be smaller, and its diagonals are shorter than these. So this also looks narrower. Same with this. This is a little further away, so it looks narrower too. A lot of students struggle with that, and they try to force these lines. You can't force one-point perspective. You've got to literally follow the lines to your vanishing point, and that will give you perfect one-point perspective. This, and I won't play the link, but I really hope that you will. This is by Raphael, who was one of the major painters in the Renaissance in Italy. And this is a fresco, and you can see his vanishing point is obscure, these two figures, but you can see that this is going back into this vanishing point, this implied vanishing point. And then you can also see how people are larger here than they are here, and that they are way back here. So you can see this this faithfulness, or this keeping with the one-point perspective to give it more reality. And here's like a drawing of this one-point perspective, just to give you the idea of how the artist built all of these depth producing levels and layers. Everything has to go back to this particular vanishing point. And there's only one, so you know it's one-point perspective. Two-point perspectives, even more fun to do. Here's your horizon line over here. There's your vertical central line of vision right here. Okay, and then you've got this two-point perspective where this can't just divide or, disappear into this one horizon line. It has a linear perspective of 2 points, here and here. And I'm zooming out just to kind of give you a better look. And these bits of perspective are sometimes very confusing. So let me show you a piece that is extremely well illustrated as far as two-point perspective. Here's the first point, as you can see, and you can use this building as your main focus. Your other horizon line is the same, but the vanishing point over here has to be in this area, because you see
When Caillebotte Paris Street Rainy Day was exhibited in 1877 at the Impressionist exhibition,
I'll play this for you to help you understand the two-point perspective, because it can be extremely difficult to understand. Okay, so
anonymous reviewer wrote, Caillebotte is an impressionist in name only. He knows how to draw and paints more seriously than his friends.
Well, when we think of Impressionism, we think of the countryside, light-filled summer, loose brushwork, and Caillebotte has given us this complex image of the subtlety of light in the city after a rainstorm.
And without all of that loose open brushwork, this reviewer is saying he knows how to draw. So there's a sense of line, of contours, of forms that exist three-dimensionally in space. And that's not what the Impressionists were doing in 1877. At that same exhibition, one could have seen Renoir's Moulin de la Galette,
which is full of light and movement and open brushwork.
Or paintings by Monet of the Gare Saint-Lazare, where Monet concentrated on the effects of light through the steam in that railway station.
In fact, so much so that even the massiveness of the locomotive dissolved within that atmosphere. But here, Caillebotte has given us a sense of massiveness. Look at the apartment buildings in the background. Look at the cobblestones. These are solid forms.
Right, nothing's dissolving into brushwork or light here.
And yet this painting is still all about light, but it's about its reflectivity, it's about shadow, and it's about the way that light can define forms in a far more solid way.
Caillebotte is painting modern Paris, wide boulevards that had just recently been built, and the modern apartment houses that lined those boulevards.
He's also giving us the middle class that then populated the city. Look at how fashionably dressed the couple in the foreground are.
Although we do seem to have some different types of people. If we look closely, we mostly see those fashionable upper class or upper middle class people, but behind the woman to the right, just above her shoulder, we see someone who looks working class. And in the background, we see what looks like a painter carrying a ladder.
And in fact, that was really one of the definitions of the new modern city, was the way in which the lives of people of different classes crossed on the streets. This is a painting that really is about intersections.
The rainy day, the yellowish gray of the sky, capturing a specific moment. You get the sense of the reflectivity of the water between the cobblestones.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there so we can continue. But I just wanted you to see a good example of something in this particular instance of dealing with two-point perspective. And this painting in particular is an extremely good example of that. So let's see if we can go back. Give it just a second. It has to reload, of course. Well, maybe not a second. Give it a couple of seconds. I apologize for this. I don't know why it does this, but it's awfully nice, don't you think? And then it starts all over, of course. So let's go back to the painting. And here is a kind of a generalized two-point perspective view. Now, if you do the cobblestones, you can see that in a different view, all of these diagonals would go back here. If you look at the building, this side of the building goes to this vantage point, and then here's the other vantage point. So it's just a way to show you two-point perspective. Sometimes you don't even notice it if things look in not only in perspective, but in proportion, and everything seems very ordered. There is also optical and conceptual representation, where the optical representation is just a single vantage point. And you can see everyone is sort of turned on either to the left or to the right side. When I was a very young kid, I had drawing skills, but I always made my people and my animals and the like either facing left or facing right, only because I had perfected that kind of, say, with a human figure, I had perfected that vantage point. And it took me a while to get them from going either left or right. I finally managed to not twist them and make them more of a realistic uh, view or composite view. Conceptual representation assembles all the distinctive characteristics of figures and objects, but views them from different perspectives. And you can say that this piece, this is from a tomb painting from around 1400 BCE, and it's a fresco. But you can also see not only are they looking side to side, but they're in different perspectives. Some are in space, some are walking along. There are fish that are in a completely different perspective. So it's sort of a conceptual representation. This is what the artist sees. Multiple perspectives. We get a complete visual or sensory impression that could not be attained from a single vantage point. Sometimes this is called chaos because it is a very chaotic scene. This is from the futurist art style, which was around the first or second decade of the 20th century. And as you can see, the artist is really, really experimenting with multiple perspectives. You know, you've got this person looking off this way. The perspective of the body is kind of toward a singular vantage point, perhaps right here. But then look at the buildings, they're just skewed everywhere. Even the shape of the stair, I guess you'd call this the stair rail, is kind of doing its own perspective and kind of going off in its own way. So you have to be kind of careful when you come upon a visual like this and the one we just looked at, because the artist could be during a period of time when the artists were all experimenting with perspective, with time and space. This is an Alexander Calder mobile uh, called Little Spider. Uh, Alexander Calder did wonderful, wonderful things with motion, and he called it kinetic art. It converts static images into active ones. And what he did, and you can see some of his absolute most beautiful mobiles and hanging art in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But what he would be doing is he would visualize in his head how these little shapes would, if suspended on wire, and perhaps another wire that supports all these pieces, not only would it move on its own because of wind or because of just the weight distribution of these little pieces, but it would take on almost its own life, like a life force pushing it to make it move. And the story goes that he would ride a train to his studio. He would ride in a train, and he had some time as the train traveled from his home to his studio. And he would make out of usually metal these little pieces. He would visualize them, and if he didn't yet know what kind of visual pieces he wanted to make, he would make these wires. And he would do it on the train while the train was moving. And it's thought that the movement of the train and the sound of the movement helped inspire him to create these kinetic sculptures. If you get a chance, please go and see any Calder work that you can find. If you're in a large city, there probably will be one, a Calder mobile uh, at a local museum. So try very hard, if you would, to go see his work, because it's awe-inspiring. Okay, so the illusion of motion. This is a photograph that the artist or the photographer took out manually parts of the body. Say this is the back of an individual, there's no head. This is a woman with a sweeping gown, and she's sort of positioned right along the center of this headless person. And it's all it is really is an experiment in creating motion without motion, creating visual illusion of motion. And this is kind of the same thing as you see this sort of chaotic view here of this woman. Uh, it's a poster, a color lithograph, frankly, of her dancing, and she's at the Folie Bergère, and she's one of the entertainers. And not only do you see her dancing and the movement of her hair and and her body, but you also see glimpses as she dances of the cityscape, of the surrounding colors and shapes. So this was also very much part of a futurist, sort of a mix-up of colors. The illusion of motion. This is entitled Girl Running Along or on a Balcony, and this was around 1912. And you'll notice as we study that first and second decade of the 20th century were incredibly filled with all these new motions, movements, and trends, and ways to create different feelings, emotions, and illusion. This artist is trying to suggest motion in creating the illusion of motion, as if you're seeing her running across the balcony. You can see duplication of her body parts to suggest multiplication of images and fragments and blurred lines, especially I believe you would call that the blurring of the back of the legs as if they're running. And of course, optical sensations. Implied motion. This is from a piece, The Baseball Catcher, from 2008. This implies the motion of the baseball going into the gloved hand. It doesn't show the motion, nor does it really even say anywhere. It's implied only. The figure and how he's kneeling, the glove up in his left hand and his right hand behind him to get it, frankly, out of the way as he grabs the pitch. This is called implied motion. Implied time. Implied time is a suggestion of the passage or duration of time. And this was in the 70s. You can tell by his 70s hair that he wanted to prove, the artist wanted to prove the implied motion over time, or what happens over time. In this case, this gentleman, when the book was moved, and then he stayed in this position, I believe, for 5 hours, it ended up resulting in a second-degree burn for him. But as an artist, he had successfully shown implied time. Now, in the next activity that you have in your worksheet, you're going to be finding examples of single 2-point linear aerial and atmospheric perspective. Find and identify the focal points and various vanishing points. Now, if this sounds difficult, it really isn't. Remember, your 1-point perspective has one vanishing point and a horizon line. 2-point would have 2 vanishing points. Aerial is like bird's eye view, and atmospheric can also be a higher up view, but you can see perhaps like fog or the movement of water. You know, when water falls, sometimes it makes a spray. So using a camera on your phone, you can photograph examples of these different perspectives. If you're unsure what they are, go back through the linear perspectives that we talked about, and that will help you frame your photography. Okay. The principles of design is your final chapter, and you do have key terms. You're going to find that these different terms will be throughout your study of art, especially in this particular class. You're going to talk a lot about composition, focal point, emphasis. You're going to talk about contrapposto. Contrapposto, I hope I can show you, but I can explain that contrapposto is a sculpture of a human figure who is balanced on one, let's say, one leg. If you put all your weight on one leg and you lean with the other leg, maybe you loosen your knee and just kind of, you know what I mean? Like you're leaning against a wall or something. That's contrapposto. When you don't give equal weight to both legs, you've got symmetry, pure, approximate, asymmetrical, also balance, rhythm, hierarchical scale. That just means what's first, what's second, in size, in order, in unity, in rhythm, in any kind of composition. You'll have the golden mean or the golden section. We'll talk about that a little bit. The golden rectangle and a spiral. Let me show you. Composition and unity. This is a very kind of overstated example of a composition. A composition is anything like a process of organization of all the visual elements that you want within your work of art. When you combine all those visual elements together, it's a composition. And when you create a composition, you create what's called an aesthetic. An aesthetic is what someone feels or thinks when they look at your composition. It's directly related to human feelings and emotions. Principles of design, unity, variety, balance, emphasis, focal point, rhythm, scale, and proportion. In this particular piece, you've got implied unity. These are all little boxes that contain parts of this image. It's a digital photograph. Now it's broken up and then strategically placed in these boxes. Also, parts are placed outside the boxes. So there's strategy in placement, in colors, and in proximity. He also uses a line to connect all of these, I guess you'd call them boxes. Unity with variety. A work of art with a strong sense of unity, which this has. Everything is connected to everything else. Very, very unified. But sometimes it can give an interrupted view when some aspects or elements of this unified composition has variety. For instance, you're just going along fine here, and then you've got, well, this is the opposite, so that works. And what is this? This is somewhat disturbing. It's variety within unity. We're back to this again, similar to this. And now we're back to some degree to this pattern. And there's my familiar pattern. And there's another familiar pattern. There's the final unity with this group of three. And then this final unified group is the reversal of this. So yeah, there's a lot of variety within unity, but the variety is what piques the interest of the viewer. So this is unity with variety. You can have emphasis on unity. This particular piece is an oil pastel on paper, and it's 4 shacks with black-eyed Susans. And you can see that there are 2 of them and the other 2 are down here. And this is very, very unified, focused artwork here. There's a unity of color, of order, of harmony, of style. Everything is pretty unified. There's nothing, even though the grass is wild and kind of, just scribbled in there, it's still unified, as is the buildings, and of course the black-eyed Susans. So this is emphasizing order and harmony, even though it looks very abstract and difficult to pin down. Okay. Emphasis on variety. There's a lot of variety in this scene, not only in shapes and colors, but also in the figures, what people are doing, what their activities are. This gentleman is a musician, probably just played a concert. This is looks like a working guy reading a magazine, perhaps. You can only see legs here, newspaper. This person looks to be asleep. This woman is caught up in her own thoughts, as is this gentleman, and on and on and on. So there's a lot of exaggerated differences rather than similarities in this image. And the emphasis here is on individuality and diversity. even though there's a common lighting effect, and you can see that by the shadows and by the highlights, this is a very individualized portrayal of a lot of different people on subway. So this is emphasis on variety. Then you can also have differences, or emphasis rather, on the differences in unity or disunity. Variety has completely obliterated unity. Disunity creates compositional chaos through the clashing of visual elements. Your mind, when you look at something like this, really tries very hard to pull out a pattern or pull out a dominant color, even to the point of squinting your eyes and trying to see a dominant shape or color. So this is a deliberate attempt to override any level of unity in the composition. I'll let you watch that. So what's the point of emphasis? And what's the point of focal? What's a focal point anyway? What is this? What are we looking at here? Is this a flower? What is it? If you look very closely, especially in here, you're looking at shoes. Shoes, wood, screws, metal, and staples. Artists use emphasis to hold the viewer's attention. Why? Why do they want to hold your attention? Because they have a message. They have something they want you to see that perhaps looks like a whole lot of shoes in circles, but it could mean something else. Like perhaps, in this case, perhaps it's indulgence. Perhaps not everyone has however many pairs of shoes there are here. So there's an emphasis here. There could be also the emphasis of figure this out for yourself. Let it be what you think it is. Methods for creating emphasis include building a focal point. Your focal point is built quite well in this piece with color. Uses black to outline the bottom of the shoe or the soles of the shoe, and then the yellow is the body of the shoes. You can also use directional lines, and there's implied lines here in the stacking of the shoes. Contrast, of course, we've talked about, and placement. So this is built as a circular device, but as you zoom in on it, and the artist wants you to zoom in, the artist wants you to spend time with it, it becomes something entirely different. Balance. This is an example of contrapposto. This is Augustus. This is a 1st century marble sculpture. And as you can see, he's probably talking to the crowd. And notice that as this arm is raised, this arm is at rest, as is this hip and this leg. And the real activity of balance happens on this leg. This leg is carrying the distribution of the weight. That's called contrapposto. Balance refers to the distribution of weight. When you use imbalance like this, he's at rest on one side and he's tense on this side, it creates more interest. Why is he in this particular layout, if you will, in the sculpture? because he's making a point. He wants his audience to look at his face and his hand, and it's not important what this leg is doing. This leg is simply keeping him upright. That's contrapposto. And contrapposto is seen a lot in the Renaissance. This is a Da Vinci sketch of proportions of the human figure. This is considered a sketch of visual or compositional balance. He used the distribution of weight of the body and all these different stances to show the distribution of weight and how visual balance is achieved with compositional balance in your body. This is how you essentially stand upright and walk. And that's all he wants you to see in this sketch. Interesting thing about Leonardo is he was always creating these very intricate, detailed sketches of sculpture or of paintings he was going to do. But you usually never find the painting or the sculpture. He gets so wrapped up in his process, his creative process, that he doesn't follow through. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of his work except these sketches, because that's what he occupied his time doing. This is symmetrical balance. Symmetry is similar form, similar arrangement, half and half is what you're seeing here with this dog. Now, there are different colors, and the illusion of red next to a realistic color tends to make the dog look completely different. The symmetry can be perfect or pure. It can even be approximate. This is not perfect, as you can see. There's less showing of the dog on the red side than there is on this side. But this is simply called symmetry. It's a balanced act. Asymmetry is asymmetrical. The forms on two sides of the composition are different. This looks like maybe a moving figure or a running figure. This is a very definite static form. It's a tree with the cover of the dirt firmly in place in Europe, probably in a German street. So you can see the asymmetrical balance here. But there's still a sense of overall balance because you've got some nice strong lines here, and the movement or the arrangement of the cobblestones in the street are very regular. They're not irregular. And they're pointing to what is the one point perspective in this piece. So this is called asymmetrical balance. One of the champions, this is not one of his works, but one of the champions of balance is Salvador Dali, and we will look at some of his artwork. This is sort of I guess you'd call a modern interpretation of vertical, diagonal, and horizontal balance. Things are balanced, even though they look like they're about to fly apart. In this drape, very balanced vertically and horizontally, as you can see. The shapes are also balanced by perspective and how they're placed diagonally, vertically, and horizontally. Radial balance. Radial balance is compositions in basically have a center point, and all of the painting or the sculpture or the pieces put together radiate from the center. That's called radial balance. Rhythm. Rhythm is when repetitive patterns convey a sense of movement. These steps, a sea of steps is what this is called. And it definitely suggests undulating, maybe an undulating ocean. You know, you can see the movement here. That definitely looks like waves. This is called just basic rhythm. Alternating rhythm results when different elements in a work of art are repeated, which you can see here. Progressive is the rhythm of element changes slightly as the elements move toward a point in the composition. These change slightly as they move away from the foreground. So there's some definitive difference. Scale. It's the size of the object in relation to objects around it. Obviously, this fellow is quite large in comparison to the human figures directly behind him. And the reflection is just one way to really exaggerate his size in this particular relative scale. Hierarchical scale is a device of relative size that indicates importance. The soldiers are almost not even completed as far as painted. You see one or two that have definitive features. The rest are implied figures. As you look up here, you also see more implied figures of the airplanes. Let me get over here and slide this down just a bit. There you go. The airplanes are implied. The background is implied as well, but it's become forefront behind this symbolic figure who is Uncle Sam. And this is a war bonds advert during World War II. During World War II, you would buy war bonds to essentially support the troops overseas. And so that was a really big push, not only for the US government, but for different types of organizations, churches, clubs, that kind of thing. This is called three theater characters, and this is relative to proportion on a very exaggerated level. A canon of proportion establishes rules about the dimensions of body parts in relation to one another. Now, as you see this, there is some similarity in the structure of the faces. Now, these people are all passing one another on the street. You can see the background. Some of them are facing different ways. They're all built in the same size proportion. Even though some are very short, some are very small, they all have the same look, the big chin, the rounded chin, and then the small, minute features on the rest of the face. These are implied proportions and very direct proportions, almost comical. The golden mean. Greek philosophers came up with the golden mean or the golden section in geometry to essentially facilitate ideal proportions in architecture. The golden mean requires that a small part of an object or figure should relate to a larger part in the same way that the larger part relates to the whole. And this ratio in this principle is 1 to 1.618. And you may have seen it illustrated as a golden rectangle. This is that length of essentially 1.618. It starts as smaller, and then it grows to a larger, and then the sum of the whole is the golden triangle. And I'm going to skip this because some of this is just way out there. A lot of artists use the golden triangle. A lot of artists do not, especially modern artists. Did Michelangelo use it? He actually did. If you look, here's your first sort of smaller piece. And then here's from here to about here, the larger of the two. And then, of course, when you put the two together, it makes the whole here. This is the fall of man and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And it's from Michelangelo during the Renaissance. And this is actually on the Sistine Chapel. And you can obviously see that it's a series. It's not this couple doing this couple doing this, and then this couple doing this. It's the same couple, Adam and Eve. They are tempted. The temptation is from the serpent, and an angel of God, it essentially throws them out of the Garden of Eden. You also have a spiral. I'm going to skip that as well and talk about your final activity, which is a visual scavenger hunt. Using the Met Museum's website, search for examples of the following elements and principles of design: impasto, thick, thick, thick paint; trompe-l'oeil, pattern; kinetic art. Up here with impasto, look at the maybe the Impressionists. Trompe-l'oeil, look at French and German painters. Pattern, just look for a distinctive pattern. Kinetic art and Alexander Calder. Focal point could be any kind of landscape or a group of people. You could set up focal points in the raft of the Medusa. Contrapposto, I explained that. So look for a sculpture piece. Any of actually the Michelangelo David is a great representation of contrapposto. Symmetry, you know what symmetry is. This looks very symmetrical. You do have a little bit of difference and sort of a variance in the background, but this is very symmetrical. Asymmetrical is not balanced as perfectly as an equal symmetry. This could also be asymmetrical balance. This side of the person is essentially perfect. This side is a little more upheaval going along. It's darker. There's a green wall, and there's probably a doorknob or a lock here. So this could be also asymmetrical balance. Rhythm, look for staircases, look for any kind of motion that is implied. Again, Alexander Calder. And then a hierarchical scale. Look for a foreground and a background. In virtually any painting, you'll find that, especially Raft of the Medusa. And that is all I have for you for week 2. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your attention. And I really hope that this is helpful to you. Thanks again.